Así que voy a pasar a presentar a Dmitry y a Zeyno, aunque en realidad me he dejado esa chuleta, así que lo voy a un poco a, como nos conocemos bien, perdonadme si no es la biografía, Zeyno y Dmitry, que habíais aportado, pero bueno, Zeyno Pekünlü es artista, es comisaria, viene convocando también dispositivos desde la... ha sido... digamos, la responsable de la programación de actividades de la Bienal de Estambul en sus últimas al menos 2 ediciones, si no me equivoco. Y también, bueno, recientemente, o bueno, no recientemente, pero bueno, es una activista feminista decidida ahí en el territorio con sede en Estambul, y desde Kirik, que ahora os contará, están ahora mismo convocando reflexiones fundamentales y junto con Dmitry, ¿no? sobre la guerra, los procesos de violencia, ¿no? los artistas también en riesgo, ¿no? En exilio. Y Dmitry Vilensky es también, bueno, artista, activista, como mencionaba antes, pertenece al colectivo de artistas rusos Chateau de Lat, que también han colaborado, bueno, y que han expuesto y que han participado de múltiples formas y múltiples ocasiones aquí en el Museo Reina Sofia, pero también obviamente en una larga y extensa red de instituciones y de alianzas, ¿no? Que van más allá de lo específicamente o de meramente el hecho artístico. Y bueno, vamos a arrancar con esta sesión que de los 2 días en el que situamos la investigación militante en el marco de la práctica artística, ¿no? Ahí con todas esas preguntas, pero declinadas desde dónde los artistas, las comisarias, las productoras culturales están pensando, ¿no? O están convocando investigaciones militantes y prácticas militantes dentro de esos marcos o estallando esos marcos artísticos. Así que nada, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Seguiremos los próximos días y supongo, Dmitry, Zeyno, que ahora me voy a girar a veros, ahí os estamos viendo. Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Y os vamos a dar la palabra. No sé si vas a querer empezar tú, Dmitry, o va a empezar Zeyno, ¿sí? ¿Dmitry? Zeyno, perfecto. Sí. Hola, querida, pues the floor is yours. Muchas gracias.
Hola, hola de Estambul. Ojalá estuviera ahí en la sala con ustedes, pero no era posible. Y mi castellano no es suficiente para hacer toda la presentación en castellano. Por eso ahora cambiará a inglés. Y gracias a traductoras del evento. As Sara was briefly mentioning, I'm an artist living and working in Istanbul and also a cultural worker. Today, I'm going to talk about where I am coming from, like a little political autobiography, together with recent political history of Turkey to show when and how I have become part of IRI and how different members of IRI's realities change in time and how we are trying to adjust accordingly to these macro changes, which obviously affecting our collective and individual works. I grew up in a student environment, organizing under the name of student coordination, very much inspired and empowered by the alter globalization movement that was very strong in early 2000s. This was also around the time where Erdogan's party, the president of Turkey right now, AKP, came into power in Turkey, defining itself as a mild conservative party that was supposedly pro-EU and pro-democratization. This party started ruling Turkey in 2002, which means they're ruling the country almost 20 years now, which makes him, together with Putin, one of the pioneers of a la mode popular authoritarian regimes, which are now more widespread across the globe. The student coordination I was talking about was embracing anti-nuclear, environmentalist, anti-military, feminist, queer activism, and separating itself from the earlier established left party-affiliated student movements. But around the same time, during the 2000s, many people who had been actively engaged in politics were sharing the view that the movements the smaller grassroots movements had been devoid of a struggle creating unity, and the protests and movements had only been temporary and organized out of urgencies against the attacks of those in power. And on the other hand, many issues such as ecological destruction, rising city rent, gentrification remained within small groups' interests and to a large extent were scorned by the traditional left. In a couple of years in power, AKP's wild version of neoliberal economy, which was basing its growth on privatization of public institutions, natural resources, and public spaces, and not taking any opposition into account became obvious. To counter this idea, starting from 2009, 2010, both temporary and permanent alliances were created specifically around the ideas of commoning practices and forming a joint struggle of the movements. The methods, strategies, and tools of alternative globalization movement were being introduced to the local context and started to create an alternative network of grassroots organizations. Around this time, I was part of one of the political networks, Our Commons, Müştereklerimiz, that aimed to create both temporary and permanent alliances around the ideas of commoning practices with a variety of movements. And our network consisted of several small organizations that were active in ecology, urban struggles, urban defense, precarity networks, labor rights, feminist and LGBT+ movements, as well as including some cooperatives. After a combination of different trials, networks, and momentums, and with the push of these aforementioned alliances between different grassroots movements, in 2013, a big uprising and resistance happened in Istanbul, Gezi resistance. And of course, you very well know it from Spain as well. It was part of a larger square movement such as Tahrir, Sintagma, 15M, the uprising in Brazil, etc. So leaning on the experiences of this movements, with the tide of uprising happening around the globe, Gezi Park turned into a common space to give voice to all the ongoing struggles in 2013. And this set forth the idea that coming concourse of different groups with the enthusiasm and capacity to get together on common grounds has the potential to obstruct the attacks that aim to silence and suffocate us. The collective, anonymous, and mass solidarity of groups having different roots and organized around different purposes created an unprecedented magnitude of solidarity in Turkey. After this uprising, one of the outcome of these alliances happened within the resistance has been the establishment of a multifunctional self-organized solidarity space. Started as a solidarity space for freelance workers, sharing their labor conditions such as NGO workers, publishing house workers, artists, programmers, hackers, etc. It was called A Place on Earth, Dünyada Mekan. And I was one of the coordinators of the space that provided freelancers with free working space, but also functioning as a meeting space for different grassroots movements. That also gave birth to several cooperatives that were taking their meetings within this space. And even though the uprising and the following years were very amazing for the Turkish political history, it came up short to break the right-wing alliances around the ruling party, AKP. And the revenge for this uprising came very harsh on us. And this was a moment of, we can call it a counter-revolution, and the door of possibility of this uprising was being closed and political depression was spreading. And the Kurdish political party obstructed the plans of Erdogan becoming president in 2016, and the revenge came as the bombing of the Kurdish cities and repeating the elections. And finally, in 2016, there was a coup attempt, which led to a state of emergency ruling in the upcoming years. So as an individual throughout this process, I was actively doing art and working as an artist. I was active in our commons movement, also working in cultural labor, artist rights, etc. But to earn my money, I was also supporting my artistic practice by my academic work. And I was working in a private university for 7 years until 2016. And around that time, I have signed Academics for Peace petition together with over 1,000 academics around Turkey, calling the government to prepare the conditions for peace negotiations in the Kurdish regions of Turkey, where there's an ongoing war between the Kurdish guerrilla and Turkish military forces. And the government's reaction was one more time very vicious to this petition and to the academics who have signed it. They launched an investigation, and contingently the university I have been affiliated for ended my contract, and 500 academics were laid off from the universities and blacklisted from working in public sector. This might sound very dramatic, but one of the most exciting outcomes of this unjust process was the creation of 12 different solidarity academies in various cities of Turkey. And they started as a symbolic action. The sacked professors begin delivering lectures as part of street academies outside university buildings, in parks and squares, but soon became an important discussion around the idea of creating radical alternative education collectives, which I was actively part of. So I gave this brief history because right around this moment, I have become part of IRE's founding assemblies, and the works I have been doing was overlapping perfectly with the other members' long-term engagements. I was part of the commoning struggle, radical pedagogies, urban struggles, solidarity spaces, solidarity education, etc. But also right after the time I have joined IRE, our realities in Turkey that was already shifting step by step took a very aggressive authoritarian turn after the coup. And as a result, all the organizations, collectives, spaces that I have been involved with dissolved and disappeared. Back then, the only strategy that we could think of was, okay, this is not a good time to do politics, so we should maybe take a step back and try to keep our crowd together, and we can reactivate ourselves when the days are better, which did not work. This strategy caused us not being able to offer a future dream in our political networks and organizations, and it was followed by a total political apathy and dullness. So looking back to this period, I was part of like core funding groups of 13 organizations and collectives, and now only 2 of them are still active. And these 2 are only founded in the last 3 years. So anything before that doesn't exist anymore. I was also affiliated with like 9 other organizations that I wasn't in the core group, but strictly following every action. Only 3 of them are still active. So like in overall, when I look at my own political recent history, I see like 15 failed organizations. So this started to give me and people like me a feeling of political melancholia, feeling of failure, discontinuity, etc. So within IRE or outside of IRE, but in like I'm using it in a very general way in a European context, it was becoming harder to discuss with our earlier vocabulary of commons, solidarity, anything radical with existing comrades. And we were just trying to survive, not go to prison over a signature or tweet. And anything that I had in my pockets when I have started to engage with IRE wasn't there anymore. And I think it was very similar for some other members of IRE from Egypt or Russia. So this engagement with common conversations were becoming very difficult. And here maybe Dmitry, you can chip in a little bit. Then I will continue with our Istanbul event and the rest. Okay.
Thank you, Zeyno. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Changing order of presentation. It really means that we should be more kind of embracing that long history of IRE And thanks, Zeyno, for sharing your political trajectory, which we found, which really we share a lot in common. And our degradation or declination came really too fast, and especially right now after full-scale war and great fascistization of Russian society and power, that was really hard for us to imagine and also to reconnect with different struggles, in particular in Erie, where people have, of course, a lot of serious troubles, and looks like that will become less and less pleasant place and open to new experiments. At the same time, the condition for artistic production and activism is seriously different. Yeah, and that's why actually together with Zeyno, we decided to join our efforts and make kind of investigation, and we can speculate what is militant research here on that kind of condition of art production under hardship and in situation of repression, and actually dislocation when many important actors from our communities are gone somewhere and located in completely different places, new situation, and in a very, so to say, not even precarious, but kind of very low state of mind, and also financially insecure, without jobs and place to stay. And for us, it brings to the fore the question, what kind of knowledge we manage to produce and how to share our experiences. And so, I don't know, Zeyno, maybe because actually maybe you step back and talk about your activities, because what I have in mind a little bit to make kind of overview of what we are doing, or me particular, and you in framework of that residency or cathedra in Erie and Reina Sofia, because I think many of our activities partly overlap or share the same platform of inquiries, but at the same time it's different. And maybe one thing maybe makes sense to comment, because we are talking on the umbrella of this military investigation, so militant research, sorry. And I think for us, it's also, as you mentioned, it's not just abstract academic or artistic interest, just part of your life. So you just not research it, you are part of it. But sometimes you are not part of movement, but part of the disintegration of movement. That's why I sometimes, not ironically, but maybe ironically speaking about that, from militant research to desperate research, when you're absolutely lost any kind of hope, and try to reassemble that kind of bodies, trajectories of the movement in space, how they can mentally come together. And so, yeah, this is really very serious task. That's what we are actually into, and that, I don't know if you mind to call it militant or not, but definitely it is. So please tell what you are do now, and then I can share briefly.
Like, as I said, like around this time in my locality, the consensus around me that our generation like saw the peak and the fruits of what we have been doing as activists during Gezi resistance and the aftermath. And people started to sort of like disengage from politics, but it was very hard on me because I was active since high school and started to feel like I'm losing half of my reason to be. And the absence of political collectives and networks, apart from IRI in this international setting. In locality, every time I voiced my wish to try something new or a small space for discussion or critical thinking, I was started to receive with cynicism. But as Dmitry was saying, I was also sensing that what we are going through or what we have been through could be very useful knowledge for other people. And I remember like noticing that when I was in Warsaw in the 100th year of anti-fascist conference, that the lessons we have learned from Turkey was actually very useful for our Polish comrades that sharing the strategies. So I started to think like how can we do it in this setting? And luckily, I'm saying luckily, I'm an artist, and it's always easier to find people with a little bit enthusiasm and hope in our field. One day I was talking about all this to a friend, Köken Argun, about like cultural institutions, their situation right now in Turkey, the cynicism of my comrades, my wish to try something again. And he was also part of the several initiatives I mentioned before. And he said like, okay, let's do something together, something small, something flexible, something that can grow and get smaller when needed. But we wanted to understand like what we want to do and how can it be. And after a year of discussions, what we think, each of us, what is needed, we decided to pursue a new approach. As I have said, like my long-term comrades were withdrawing from the active politics and focusing more on knowledge production side, writing and books and teaching, etc. So it was obvious that we wouldn't be able to convince anyone for like active politics in the streets, and it wasn't really possible also. So we also wanted to focus on the discussion and research part. From our perspective, against the attacks of power, people and movements and the ideas were not being discussed properly. There was always this solidarity discourse with each other against the bigger enemy. And it was every day in solidarity with this, in solidarity with that. Like the attacks were so great, like we have to be in solidarity with someone every day. And there was this emphasis on like togetherness against the enemy. But this operation also resulted like us gathering only in the defense lines, and we couldn't expand beyond right-based activism, like trying to defend our rights and push back the attacks. And there was no nuanced discussions, there was no time or space for that. So with Kirik, we wanted to expand beyond these defense lines and activate discussions that nobody wants to do it right now at this moment. And the discussion that remained in the cracks during this period. So Kirik means broken in Turkish, but also means crack, the fault line, effeminate, gay, hue, etc. So we adopted this versatile name for us, sort of embracing all the meanings. And we said, like, without forgetting the importance of togetherness and solidarity, we want to explore the creative potentials of in-betweenness. And we will talk about some difficult topics that nobody wants to talk right now. And right after this, like, formation of the idea, like around our first year, the war started in Russia, Russia invading Ukraine, and we found ourselves talking frequently with Dmitry, first on very practical things, people fleeing to Istanbul, the political dissidents from Russia. We are trying to help friends, friends of friends, passing money, trying to find a rented space, whatever. But soon we also expanded the conversation on how we are trying to function, do politics or art under these conditions. And what does it mean to be in diaspora? What does it mean to be expelled? Or what does it to be in diaspora voluntarily? And around that time, we have also realized, even though we are direct border neighbors and very similar political situations, we have never discussed in depth these similarities or our tactics or strategies. And having so many political dissidents from Russia and Belarus at that moment in Istanbul, And also keep in mind, Istanbul always been a temporary refuge in these situations after Iraq war, Afghan war, Syrian war, etc. We have decided that could be perfect place to host a gathering focused on the region and the knowledge we produce under this oppression. And we have organized the event, The Teach Out, titled Between Iraq and the Hard Place, Experience and Knowledge Sharing for Solidarity Against Authoritarian Regimes, Repressions and War. It was 2022 in Istanbul, and it aimed to bring academics, artists, activists from different backgrounds from Russia, Serbia, Belarus, Iran, Egypt, and Turkey. And it was for 3 days. We tried to explore our shifting and multiple experiences. There were like 29, 30 participants presenting on different sessions. And it was a closed event by invitation only to create a safe space for people to express themselves. And we asked them to, like, in the format of Teach Out, like do a presentation of 15 minutes on a topic you choose, but address the audience with a specific experience relating to the subject of the meeting. And it was a very experience-based narrative that enabled the participants to discuss in a very situated manner, not abstract concepts and perspectives, but very particular situation with specific context. And this form of discussion made the meeting particularly intimate, open, and politically reboosting. And on the other hand, while like situating ourselves in different geographies and contexts through our experiences, several threads of discussion started to connect different presentations together, which are now part of, I think, our research continuing around these issues as well. So one of the biggest questions was like how to name and describe these new authoritarian regimes. In different presentations, people use different terms such as neo-fascism, neo-authoritarianism, neo-totalitarianism, neo-Bonapartism, populism, etc. Slowly, the discussion evolved into the question, what is so unique to these new regimes that they are escaping from the old concepts? Or do we need to name them in order to fight against them? Another highlighted topic was, before this meeting, we were all feeling isolated and in solitude in each locality. But while discussing the specifics of each locality, we also reflected on the possibility to, this local politics are giving us this feeling of solitude, but actually they are very similar to each other, and this division of struggles is very artificial. And we have come to the conclusion that even without knowing the specifics of each other political condition and struggles, it is still possible to feel and understand the similarities in a more affective way that is fed by similar experiences. And another topic came out of it is the need of abandoning reactive politics, like reacting on the moment, and the need of building a new internationalism of the East, South, or new internationalism of neighbors, like neighboring regions. And of course, very urgent, and we don't know how to continue from here, like how to continue our relations and collaboration after this meeting was over, like where the resources are lacking. So all these discussions were also very connected that what we are trying to do at our initiative at Kirik. In its first year, we hosted a number of discussions on radicalizing the meaning of solidarity again, because in Turkey it started to mean sort of like mutual aid, helping out each other, etc. But what is the radical core of solidarity? And we did some screenings and discussions around this, and also a film programming on ecological crisis, colonialism, extractivism, and crime, genocide, and accountability. And for the second year, when we started to think around all these issues, also we are part of the node with this research. We are hosting talks and screenings, primarily addressing the complex issue of sanctions and boycotts. specifically on the local geography. So far, I should also mention, because of the sensitivity of this issue, we are doing this, most of these gatherings by invitation only. Most of our speakers doesn't want to be recorded or having their talks online. They don't want people to hijack the event, etc. So far, we have hosted Yazan Khalili and Katia Krupenikova, also Ilya Budratskits. They talk about the Palestine and Russia. Soon we are hosting Yulia Yurchenko from Ukraine and Nassim Norizi from Iran. And from there, we also will be focusing a little bit on the cultural polarization and sanctions and boycotts around that as well. We will jump to that topic with Rizhin Sahakian. So this is the research and discussions we are following at Kirik. To finalize what I was trying to say during this presentation, this sanctions and boycotts and cultural polarization is a research line we share with Dmitry. And through these conversations, I believe we have created a lost connection within IRI that was very specific to Russia and Turkey, or it seemed like it's very specific to Russia and Turkey, but also always a danger to other geographies. It's always on your door, on your footstep. And this process taught us that in an organization like IRI, bringing different activists more or less from the similar region will also have its moments of confusion, some people falling off the grid like I did at some point, some people coming back with different agendas and connections. And sometimes their actions and researchers might not be easy to fit in certain timelines, project descriptions, and planning, because these are tough geographies. And what we project for a month from now might be totally different. Dmitry could be in Russia, in another city. It could happen to me. A comrade could be in prison. So it's really hard to fit this kind of geographies into timelines and project descriptions and plannings. So this urgency shifts from one moment to another. And even though we personally, or as collectives or comrades, we have long-term ideas, ideologies, and objectives, I think the host organizations and institutions should be flexible to accommodate this shift changes. And I think we managed to communicate this need so that now we are here, we are creating this node and research within the IRI and also within the programming of Reina Sofia. And I think this is something we should be communicating more. That's all from me. Yeah, go ahead, Dmitry.
Okay. Thank you, Zeyno. You really told most of things that actually I want to talk about too. But in relation to that kind of practical stuff, it's very important that we all face that kind of, because what is knowledge production? It's actually something which can be shared with wider audience. But as you mentioned right now, because of that sensitive issue of security, like, for example, I'm doing webinars here and there because 90% of our community of immediate kind of activist network or critical cultural network right now gone. But 10% and some new voices appear and they're there and quite in desperate situations. So I'm running that kind of dialogues called Here and There, where we try online to make kind of more or less similar what you do. Like webinars when people, I choose consciously that people who I know somehow doing some activity, but at the same time, it's a very kind of confidential, almost clandestine kind of gathering, which also, again, people don't allow to record and so on. Another thing that was also important for us to continue that kind of lines of communication and support. So we managed to establish kind of support, financial support for new projects which cannot be realized in the current political situation in Russian context. So that was already kind of strong filter, and we received surprisingly a lot of very interesting contribution, and especially we supported research. First of all, it was supporting text based on research of certain kind of problems, like problems how people report different activities in online or in real life, how that new culture of reporting police is formed, and a lot of that super interesting issue, which completely new kind of element of that political everyday repression, but at the same time also resistance. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about that teach out, because it kicked out a lot of that kind of new relation and activities which you luckily able to continue in Istanbul, so that also series of online discussion, and we also continue, but you know, we love that kind of more or less informal, formal educational platform, and we established that. Actually, it's announced in this panel that School of Emergency, which became kind of a roaming platform, that the School of Engaged Art stopped to exist. We are not in Russia anymore. We can't do there any activity. And as I said, most of our immediate community, like the faculty, the participant of last enrollment to the school, they're gone. So, but this platform, it's developed through that kind of new situation where we have that dislocated persons with their own knowledge. Actually, right now, it's amazing how you can come to Istanbul or to Belgrade or to Tbilisi or to Yerevan, and all of a sudden you meet people from so different parts of Russia, you know, they're all together from Siberia, from Dagestan, those whom before you were only connected online somehow, distantly, right now gathered into that weird assemblages, and it creates completely new situation. But for us, because we were privileged to become part of that international scene and part of IRI. So for us, it's important, like it was also in Istanbul and that teach out, to bring them in the contact with local kind of scene. Like we are doing School of Emergency in Stockholm. What does it mean? That we have 12 fellows from originally from Russia and 6-7 fellows from Sweden, which based on module structure meet. Sometimes we have 5 modules where they come together for meeting points, and through that dialogue we develop certain kind of understanding, and particular for that kind of new refugees, it's important to understand new surrounding and new possibility to continue their work, not to get into the ghetto, because ghettoization, I would say, it's a really biggest trouble, and it's already unfortunately happening with replicating all that kind of imperial kind of ideas and being in suffocating bubble where, but many people really don't know. They come into the places where they know no one, you know. And I see our role as a collective through that kind of roaming platform to connect this knowledge with the local knowledge, with situated knowledge of, for example, that residues of Swedish democracy, the fascization, the new kind of Swedish Democrats is quite open fascist party, unfortunately. That's how Swedes consider them. So it's a lot of that kind of exchange should happen, and maybe in the course of a time it brings to some kind of new possibilities of struggle and resistance and a particular new cultural manifestation, because it's not just about that war. There are many wars. It's not just about that new refugees. It's about generation of refugees who contributed a lot to that cultural diversity and political activism in Europe. So it's a culture of people who lost their homes. So, and that for us, it's very important. Also, maybe it may mentioned not like a report, but kind of also to give certain insight into our activities, that together with Maria Lind and Stas Shuripa, for more than already 1 year, we're co-curating series, again, webinars despite or making of art under the hardship. More or less similar topic, but because of Maria's involvement into the project, it also clandestine. So actually, we have all archive of actually recording of that meetings, because it involved quite serious and very sometimes famous voices like Anka Rujoi, Erzen Kololi, Zubat, Boris Buden, Yelena Zisic, Malgor Zata Mirgatas, and many other people who actually make reports, and a lot of historical reports. It's about how it was in Kosovo during Yugoslavian war, how Erzen started his activity, you know, and his early work. So it was really impressive. How, for example, Zubat right now to operate in Vietnam, it became also impossible. So actually, the organization is dissolved, and so it's another situation. So it's a lot of that kind of knowledge which really helped to understand, first of all, maybe I don't know if it's optimistic, a little bit, no, but at the same time, as Benjamin said, that a state of exception is not, a state of emergency is not exception, but the rule. So actually, unfortunately, the situation of the worst repression is kind of normal situation which humanity faced always. And previous generation, many generations before have to deal with that. And unfortunately, this luxury to live in situation and everything goes, it's not, this is exception, but not a rule. Anyway, I don't know how to continue. And actually, I think we should leave some space for the question, because it will be much more easier. And last thing which I wanted to say, because actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, that problematization, how to archive that sensitive materials in many ways. So because of security reasons, because also, as you said, certain kind of informality. So sometimes it's not just a public lecture or webinar, it's a very personal talk. And sometimes you think, I just made few days ago, we didn't record it because it was so emotional. And it was unshareable, because actually, if you've been there, it's like very, sometimes it becomes also very kind of psychological kind of drama when people talk about what they're coming through and trying to share with that immediate and very kind of limited audience. So yeah, but at the same time, for me right now, it's also challenge how to experiment with that kind of archiving and sharing, because for me, it's important to share this knowledge and transform it. Maybe artistic practice could be the best, but at the same time, maybe reenactment. Not, we right now thinking inside of collective a lot what kind of medium we can invent. And at the same time, the last things which I wanted to mention, because School of Emergency, it's a public thing, so we'll do a lot of some public events, like with Kechi Chukhov, with Oksana Timofeeva, with Alexandra Petty and Santi. So yeah, that things possible to share, but something impossible, and it's the most challenging thing. So thank you so much, and would be nice if you ask some questions, so and we maybe make it in dialogue. You mute.
A ver, ahora, perdón, que tenía el micro bajado, perdona. Muchísimas gracias, Zeyno, Dmitry, por compartir con nosotras estos procesos. En las conversaciones que hemos tenido en estos meses sobre la investigación militante, ¿no? En algunos momentos nos preguntábamos qué es la investigación militante, ¿no? Y decían las compañeras de Catacrack, de la Fundación de los Comunes, ¿no? Nos preguntamos si cuando estamos en la cantina de nuestro espacio autogestionado o cocinando para las compañeras estamos haciendo investigación militante, si en el gesto de la escucha, de el establecer el espacio, ¿no? De la cercanía, de la solidaridad, estamos haciendo investigación militante. Los procesos que habéis compartido a mí me hacían pensar en otra de las redes y salvando las distancias absolutamente, ¿no? Entendiendo el contexto y que el marco es muy distinto, pero me hacían pensar en otra de las redes con las que colaboramos de la Internacional, esta red de museos europeos que Zeyno mencionaba, el encuentro antifascista de 2019 en el Museo de Varsovia, y esa escucha de las herramientas, ¿no? De las compañeras polacas, de las herramientas que venían de esos saberes y experiencias de Turquía. Y en los últimos años, la Internacional, si bien es un espacio, ¿no? Como de compartir desde distintas institucionalidades más, digamos, tradicionales, ¿no? O digamos, desde luego no hegemónicas, pero sí instituciones consolidadas de arte que se han visto, ¿no? Como que espacios, digamos, con una capacidad de resistir, ¿no? Ciertos envites. Y ¿no hay traducción? Ha habido un momento... A ver... ¿Ahora funciona? ¿Me escucháis bien, Zeyno, Dmitry?
Yeah, it was a break in translation. That's why I asked the question. Sorry.
Yeah, I can understand in Spanish, so I'm not using it.
Vale,
so I didn't
genial.
realize, yeah.
Bueno, hablaba cómo las instituciones, ¿no? de arte en los últimos años están viviendo, digamos, ¿no? en el marco de las guerras culturales, pues una serie de ataques y un intento, ¿no? por desmontar una cierta institucionalidad crítica que se ha construido en las últimas décadas, y hemos visto, por ejemplo, ¿no? el caso de la Moderna Galería, con Zdenka Badovinac quitada, digamos, de su posición de directora, y con, digamos, el gobierno esloveno, ¿no? y el Ministerio de Cultura esloveno, bajo ese gobierno populista, horadando los cimientos y destruyendo en muy poco tiempo lo que venía siendo un modelo institucional, pues potente, experimental, que había, ¿no? planteado una suerte de proyecto transformador. Entonces pensaba en ellas, pensaba en las compañeras polacas que ha mencionado Zeyno, pensaba también en las compañeras turcas de SALT, ¿no? Cómo las condiciones geopolíticas están de alguna manera minando y desarmando todo ese marco institucional, en muchos casos ya frágil de por sí, y cómo en estos años las herramientas que hemos podido construir de solidaridad y de prácticas comunes tenían que ver muchas veces más con ese dispositivo de escucha y acompañamiento en un día a día, ¿no? que gotita a gotita va ahora dando la subjetividad y la posibilidad de pensar de manera también proyectiva de las personas que están habitando esos espacios. Y el aprendizaje enorme que ha sido para todas construir ese espacio afectivo político que nos permite leernos y proyectarnos, ¿no? hacia el futuro a partir de la escucha cotidiana de la debacle en muchos sentidos, ¿no? Y más que una pregunta, como que lanzaba esa especie de línea de fuga en otra dirección. Y para daros las gracias también, ¿no? por compartir desde ese lugar Y como estamos poquitas, pero estamos un poco como en casa, quizá quería invitar también a las compañeras que nos acompañan aquí, también hasta Vicky de la laboratoria, compañeras del centro de estudios y del IRI, si queríais también lanzar alguna pregunta o comentario a Dmitry y a Zeyno. ¿Y por allá? Pues no sé si Dmitry y Zeyno, si vosotras queréis, bueno, también en el Zoom podéis también contribuir, y también las otras compis del IRI que estáis, podéis hacerlo si queréis, porque os hemos subido a panelistas directamente con el micro. La idea, si no, también es acumular un poco las distintas experiencias de las presentaciones que están compartiendo las compañeras del IRI, y si no, también podemos después de la segunda... Sí, vale, voy a pasar el micro a Gabriela, pero si no, también después de la siguiente sesión podremos recoger.
Yeah, hi. And I was just, it's a comment on the amazing stories that we've heard. So this is precisely the example of how something like IRI, the Institute of Radical Imagination, can really remain that connection, that joint between cultural institutions in their formal way and the world of activism, because the stories we've heard are symbolic and significant of what the world of activism experiences, which is not, I mean, there are the moments of high, there are the moments of the protest, of the reactions, of when there's a lot of energy and we are all together. But the difficulty is when we become silent, and we become silent because of political situations and because of political conditions. So even more so, it's important to have those spaces of relationships and comradeships and connections, also on a very human level, that you feel that in a way you don't remain alone despite the differences of territories and distances. And this is one thing that makes me think about the shape of IRI as a concept and as an attempt, is that back then in 2017, we decided to be joining forces and start this adventure as individuals. So we, in a way, each one of us, as Zeyno was telling the story, and Dmitry with this activities back then in St. Petersburg, I was and I am with the Axilo Filangieri in Naples, but each one of us was joining in the project as an individual, but being connected as with his own territory, his own situated experience with activist experience. I was in Naples, Marco in Venice, Emanuele in Milano, Theo is in Athens, and so on. And in those years, because it's, you know, in 5 years, it has happened much. And also many things have happened in our spaces, even on this side of the sea, spaces being threatened and political scenario change, of course, with the differences. So I think it's important, this form of intimate alliance among also all members of IRI, precisely to allow also these moments of blank when we want to activate, but we are really lost and do not know how to start from, and we need a time to reconnect and redevelop connections. So thank you. There's something happening on the chat. Yeah, I cannot read from here.
¿Activas este? Ay, gracias. Pero no sé si habías terminado, Gabriela.
Yes, yes, please.
Gracias, Gabriela. Lo leo y así las traductoras lo pueden traducir. Dice, ¿qué papel ocupa Ana CSS? Dice, ¿qué papel ocupa la melancolía en vuestras investigaciones militantes / desesperadas? Que decía Dmitry, me parece que esta suerte de contingencia es un dispositivo radical en el sentido de que suceda o no suceda, contiene mucha energía creativa y a veces simplemente visceral, pero altamente presente en nuestras vivencias y prácticas. No sé si queréis, Dmitry o Zeyno, responder a la compañera que ha escrito en el... Si habéis podido oír la traducción bien.
Yeah, I would. I mean,
Sí.
This is a hard question that what also Dmitry was saying, that I do think compared to many experiences, we never had the time to digest anything. Not the uprising, not what came after, because like it's always running ahead of us. And as Dmitry was saying, it's also very difficult to archive things or show it publicly, etc. So going back to archives is always a problematic situation. But I think this melancholia is something that everybody's trying to fight against. But it's really hard on the other hand, because you also find this energy looking at your good moments, but you also see the defeat looking at the same period. So I don't want this remembrance of what we have been through, like a melancholic remembrance, but more about like building our future dreams through this remembrance. But of course, it comes and back. But I think melancholia, in a certain extent, has its potentials without forgetting about it, but without falling to the trap of that. I don't know, like it's very complicated, because like we are trying to keep each other from falling into that, but also you see the potential, a little bit of potential there. Recently, I realized many people are trying to, it's the 10th year of the uprising, and this year we have elections, and there's a hope to get rid of this government, etc. So I see a lot of people dealing with this past, with a hope of like starting, not from the beginning, but starting somewhere again. So it keeps coming back, even though you say like, okay, this is over, we have to start over, a new era is coming, etc. It keeps pushing back.
Can I comment? Yeah. Actually, but it brings us back, because actually when we start a little bit speculate what is militant research, actually you can hardly not to mention Connective Tissues with the exemplary text on militant research. But when we were asked about melancholia, it came to my mind, sorry for being a big fan of Connective Tissues, that they published the text Political Sadness. And actually, sadness, it's a bit different from melancholia. Maybe, I don't know how it was in Spanish, because they're also talking about potentiality. And actually, we published that text in the issue of, it was 2000, oh my God, it was 2007. We were speaking about melancholia and political sadness. So it looks like it's really, without interruption, it's one of the major topic of all kind of left. Yeah, and actually collectivity thoughts almost give a very good insights, and we're also thinking how to politicize that feeling of sadness, defeat, and melancholia. So, and right now it comes to new nuances. We definitely don't want to be that our major topic, but at the same time, I think without, first of all, realistically acknowledge that kind of feeling which shared by many kind of movements which coming through the series of defeats. Also, it's not nothing new. We know it from 19th century. After the collapse of Paris Commune, it was a lot of that kind of reflection, similar to current ones. So I don't know, but for us right now, it's more kind of a desperate feeling because actually you really don't understand what kind of positive scenario. And actually, I'm right now in Germany, and maybe I can share, because we thought that we are coming through that kind of conscious collapse. So many things we believe and actually attack on whatever they call Russian culture. I think such things don't exist, but anyway, we have really kind of cognitive collapse, epistemological collapse. But I see here that many of our friends from old networks in Germany have similar one, because once they believe in, pacifism, peace movement against NATO, disarmament, possibilities for negotiation, it's all gone in less than 1 month. That the values in society through that propaganda of that war machine, it completely changed everything. And right now, I think we have again to reassemble in that kind of dialogues what could be alternative. Because actually, of course, I'm not advocating any form of Putinism or whatever, but at the same time, how right now we support like changing small devil in front of big devil, but we also know that proverbs that actually to supporting any devil brings small devil. Doesn't matter how small it is in relation to the big. And we have to be really conscious about it. And that's, I don't know the answer. Maybe that also creates a certain kind of whatever we call melancholy, sadness, and desperation. Sorry. And please check this issue. I haven't looked at it for, I don't know, it 15 years ago published.
Yeah, just to say one more thing, I keep going back and reading this quote from Daniel Ben Said. He says, like, when resignation and melancholy follow the ecstasy of the event, as when love's excitement dulls under the force of habit, it becomes absolutely essential not to adjust yourself to the moments of the fatigue. So, I mean,
yeah.
As a reminder, it's hard, but as a reminder.
Gracias. A ver si me suena el micro un momentín. Ahí. Muchas gracias a los dos. Me venía a la cabeza, hace un par de meses organizamos aquí en el museo, las compañeras del Centro de Estudios, un encuentro 2 días sobre las guerras culturales y que estaba enfocado desde el punto de vista de la militarización de la comunicación política y de la esfera de lo público, de los medios. Y de hecho participó una compañera de Turquía que yo me preguntaba si es en la diáspora, digamos, ella hace unos años que no está en Turquía ya, hace años. Me preguntaba incluso si igual tú la habías conocido, Zeyno, Eche o Ece Temelkuran, una escritora y periodista que hizo un discurso hermoso, brillante, además en medio de unos ataques de trolls que sufrimos en el Zoom del museo durante su charla, ¿no? O sea, que hubo un momento ahí de que se cruzó precisamente de lo que estábamos hablando, las prácticas ahí de los trolls, machirulos metiéndose en el chat, y un momento muy hermoso desde una suerte de melancolía, pero ella hacía como una propuesta de lo que pensaba que que nos podía de alguna manera movilizar desde esa melancolía, y hablaba del radical love, del amor radical, como que era lo que desde donde nos podíamos agarrar con todo, ¿no? Y a mí me atravesó muchísimo ese concepto y esa fuerza, ¿no?, del amor radical, por quedarnos también con algo juntas ahí con la melancolía también, pero también con el amor. Y yo creo que vamos a cerrar esta primera parte, si os parece, a no ser que queráis comentar algo más o alguien aquí en la sala. Y vamos a hacer una pequeñita pausa de unos 10 minutos para empezar la siguiente sesión con Emanuele Braga, que no lo he mencionado antes. Mira, llegan las compañeras de tejidos conjuntivos por ahí. Hacemos una pausa de 7-10 minutos y empezamos de nuevo. Muchísimas gracias, Zeyno, Dmitry. Un aplauso para las compañeras. Gracias.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's important to formulate such difficult things. Okay. Chao.
Un abrazo muy grande.
Bye.
Y volvemos en 7 minutillos.